enjoyed the conference so far. And in this session, we are going to talk about career planning, what it is, how it can help you. And I'm delighted to be joined today by 4 incredible women, all of whom come from very different corners of the football industry. But I hope between us, we can give you some great pointers and hints about how to think about your career in football. So let's begin with me. My name's Jane Purdon. I was the CEO of Women in Football until November, and I'm still on the board. I stepped away just to have what I'm calling a grown-up gap year. We'll see how that goes. As well as being a remaining director of Women in Football, I also chair something called, which I've heard today, called PGAC and PJAC. And the debate rages, and nobody's yet settled which one it is, but it's the Professional Game Academy Audit Company, a bit of a mouthful, and it acts as the independent auditor of the academies in male professional clubs. So that's me. I'm going to introduce the panel and get them talking straight away. So I'm going to introduce everyone and then find into a question for each one. I'm going to start with Mayi. Mayi Cruz Blanco. She's the Managing Director of LHH Sports and Athlete Solutions. Mm-hmm. She has experience in the sports industry for over 20 years. You're a lifer like me, aren't you, Mayi? And that experience goes from being an athlete, through academia, via the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, World Archery, FIFA, the Adeco Group, to co-founding the Sports and Equity International Federation. While at FIFA, Mayi led the transformation of the Women's Football Development Programme for close to a decade and introduced legacy programmes for all the top FIFA women's competitions. And launched the first ever FIFA female leadership programme. So welcome, Mayi. And I'm going to ask you, Mayi, quite a career, and you started as an athlete. How did you transition from being an athlete into the business of sport? That's my first question. My second question, which I'm going to ask everybody, is how much of your career has been planned? I want a percentage.
That's a good one, Jane. So I guess starting as an athlete and coming into the sport world as an athlete is a very unique experience. But your career as an athlete reached to an end. And for me, one of the things that helped me in that transition was that once an athlete, you are always an athlete. It's not about, cleaning up with that identity. It's how you carry that identity over. And it has helped me so much in the work I have done in sports, understanding the whole sporting structure, understanding the industry. Even when I came to work in football, I was not a footballer, I was not in the football industry, but that understanding helped me a lot. One of the things that were really, really important in my career was that I followed my passion. So my parents wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor, very typical careers for girls, but I wanted to continue in sports. So I decided to study sports science. Have I followed my parents' wish, I would not be talking to you here. And I come from Cuba, so you can imagine my journey from a communist country where I lived for 27 years, jumping on a plane for the first time and coming to do the FIFA Master. I would never have had that opportunity have I followed that. So as an athlete, for me, it was really important to follow that passion for sports. I didn't want to be a coach. I didn't want to be a nutritionist or a sports psychologist that sometimes are logical careers for athletes, but I wanted to be part of the business of sports. And I dreamed to be part of the Olympic Games. I dreamed to be somewhat connected to the World Cup because I watched the Olympics with my father and I watched football with my father. So I wanted to be part of that. Now, of course, if you ask a young Cuban woman, 18-year-old, will you be part of FIFA? At that time, that was mission impossible. But that was fundamental for me as an athlete to follow my passion. And I think one of the things that evolved in my career was my purpose. Because I started wanting to be part of the sports industry, wanted to be part of the international sports industry, but then it was that passion for helping women and girls, especially in football. That changed my life completely. So I think those were very important elements in my transition. And if I plan my career, well, that is a difficult one. back in Cuba, I would have never dreamed to be here or to cross the ocean and come to Europe. But there was that, I would say 20%. 20% that I dream about being part of that world. Yeah. And I found that way.
What I am hearing loud and clear though, Margie, is about passion and values and letting your passion drive your career, letting your values shape your career. Thank you. Lungi, it's been my absolute privilege to work with Lungi for 3.5 years. Ages. And Lungi herself has worked in professional football for, do you know what, Lungi, when you wrote your bio, you put just under a decade, and I crossed out just under and put nearly, just a little CV point there. So it's
I'll make a note to change that, Jane, thank you.
Lungi is currently the Chief Operating Officer at Birmingham City Football Club, and prior to that she spent several years at Charlton Athletic. And at Birmingham her responsibilities vary from looking after the women's team to safety operations across company sites. She's a co-director of mine at Women in Football, and in 2018 she was named as a Next Gen Leader for 2019, one of 30 rising professionals from across the UK sports industry, and I wholeheartedly endorse that. She's a fantastic lady. So Lungi, my question to you is tell us a little bit, well, two questions. Tell us a little bit about your journey to be Chief Operating Officer of a leading football club. And same question, Margie, how much of that was planned? I want a number.
Thanks, Jane. I'm not sure about leading football club, but it's a little loud. So as you've already alluded to, my work in football started at Charlton, but before then I had a very traditional route into education. I did my GCSEs, I then did my A-levels, and then I went on to read psychology at Oxford Brookes University. I then graduated, applied for several graduate schemes, eventually landed one with a bank in Canary Wharf. I did that for about 6 months. I was supposed to be there for 24 months, but actually soon realised that it wasn't for me, and I left. And actually when I left, I was going to go and do my master's in occupational psychology, because I always knew that I wanted a career in HR, helping people, developing people, and all of the above. But my dad sat me down and said, you know, you can do a master's, but why don't you take a break, go and get some real life work experience. I live locally to the Valley, southeast London, and there was a role at Charlton, a temporary role looking after the executive team there. So I went in as an executive administrator, supposed to be there for 12 months. That ended up being 6.5 years, taking up several roles. But when I got there, my eyes were really open in terms of the amount of opportunities there were within the industry. I really got to know the club. I got to know the industry. I got to know exactly what went on behind the scenes, whereas before, actually, I had no idea. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people before they actually get into the industry. I was lucky to be in an environment where I was really supported, and the club supported me in getting my diploma in HR management. So I did that over a few years. I then grew in terms of HR at the club. The club was in a real transitioning period, and I was lucky enough to be quite central to that. But a big part of my remit was supporting our vice chairman at the time, our COO at the time, CFO and chief commercial officer. That really exposed me to all operations across the club and taught me everything essentially about the industry. I then took on several roles within the club, culminating in a head of HR role back in 2015 now, and then joined the Women in Football Board in 2018. That opened my eyes even more in terms of the challenges that women obviously face within the industry, which I think I'd been shielded from, mainly because of the people who were around me, amazing women, people like Jane, people like the whole Women in Football Board, but actually soon realised that it's not the same for everybody. So Women in Football really aligns with everything I believe in terms of developing people, breaking down those barriers, and actually really giving people an opportunity. Early 2019, or late 2018, I should say, the opportunity to join Birmingham City arose. And actually, initially, it was just supposed to be a senior operations role, but that quickly changed into actually looking after a lot more departments. And as Jane has said, part of that is the women's team. Our facilities across both sites in terms of the training ground and the stadium, and then HR and everything else actually that nobody else wants to do. So that's always fun. That's been 3 years now. In terms of how much of my career has been planned, that's really hard, Jane, to say, because I think it's hard to put a number on it. I will get a number for you though. I think probably 40%. I think a lot of it has been out of my control. A lot of it has been opportunities that I've been presented with, which actually at times I've been reluctant to take, but I've learned as the years have gone on that actually when something does come your way, you need to grab that with both hands. And I think in terms of next steps, I'm not sure. I'm still enjoying what I'm doing. I'm still enjoying the challenge, and it is still a challenge. I'm learning as each day goes on, and I don't know what's next. So if that's your next question, I can't answer it.
Okay, well, and so what I heard from that, Lungi, was you learnt the job from the ground up in a club environment. There's been some formal education on the way, like the HR piece, and you ain't done yet. Yeah, that's fascinating, thank you. Okay, on to Katie Bowman. So Katie also started work at a club. I didn't know this until I was going to say I was doing my research, someone else did. Can't claim their work. Katie started at Chelsea Football Club, where you were head of hospitality and events, and spent 8 years there. And from there she joined Barclays, and Katie now heads up the football partnerships within Barclays and manages the activation of them globally, I understand. Fantastic. It's not just football though. I know over the years you've looked after other Barclays partnerships as well. So the ATP World Tour Finals, Barclays Bikes, and of course most notably the title sponsorship of the Premier League, and now that's obviously segued into an official banking partner of the Premier League. So welcome, Katie. So my questions to you, Katie, are, again, I'm going to ask you how much of all this was planned, but I think you've obviously worked in football for a long time, like all of us, and you have that perspective of working for a commercial partner. From that perspective, how do you think things have changed for women working in the industry since maybe you joined Barclays 8 years ago?
I mean, the landscape has changed dramatically. I think this room and the one we're in just now is just testament of that. You know, you would never ever have seen that in football a few years ago. It's completely changed the landscape in that everybody in this room and elsewhere are creating these role models for people to aspire to. You just didn't have that before. You didn't see a pathway coming into a role in football that you could aspire to get to. So I think it's changed dramatically in that sense. And hearing from everybody on the stage this morning, it's obviously changed. However, there's still massive gaps, and I think that the gender pay gap across all industries, but particularly football and particularly finance, which is what I work in sort of by default. I would say I work in sport, but I just happen to do it for a bank, and all the other gaps still mean that there's a really long way to go. And I think that the Me Too movement, I've thought a lot about this, as the Me Too movement has gone a really long way to bring some of the issues that were being experienced on a day-to-day basis into the forefront. And I think there's been a lot of change off the back of that. But there's still I would say there's still a really long way to go.
Yeah. Did anybody here see that Twitter account on International Women's Day that was tweeting about the gender pay gap? I mean, I thought it was the most powerful thing to happen on International Women's Day. What I really like there, Katie, you talk about the gender pay gap, but there are other gaps as well, which there are.
There are other gaps, and I think they've all been highlighted already in those sessions this morning. But I read something yesterday which said that women are likely to ask for a 6% less pay rise in negotiations than men because they don't feel confident enough. And I'm like, that's not because you feel like you're 6% less worthy than the man. It's just because you've been sort of institutionalized to believe that you are so supposed to be grateful for everything you get. And I think that's still there. I really, I think that I think we're going to see soon a generation where we currently are with middle managers coming through, which will really be making a difference to drive change. But I think that some of the senior management you've got in organisations they're going through this sort of equal rights, diversity and inclusion phase because they're being told to do it, not because they feel it and believe it and embrace it. They're doing it because, well, this is what's being said, this is what's coming from the top, it's part of our diversity and inclusion. It shouldn't be like that. But you've got this next generation of middle male managers that have come from a background where they are starting to truly believe it, that women are equal to men. But I think that's going to take a while for those very senior, sort of more elderly senior managers to go in order for the middle managers to come through.
So we certainly Women for All about speeding up the process. We know it's coming. We all know the change is coming. It's happening.
But it needs the men. I'm going to just say it out right now. It needs, because that's
Shut down to the other end.
that we're still it's still institutionally sexist. Football and banking. I work in both fields, and it needs those men with a different mindset to champion the equal opportunities for women, because they are the ones running the show. They're the ones making the decision. They're the ones around the boardroom at the moment. Hopefully that we'll see more and more change coming through that. But that's who's making the decisions. It's as simple as that. Career planning. I'm probably the wrong person to be sat up here, I would say. 5%. But I was thinking about this. I think I subconsciously was career planning without really even knowing it, because I did a business degree at Nottingham University. I came from a family that had no background in football, that didn't really watch football. My dad was a big F1 fan, never was on in the house, no one had a team. But I did my dissertation at university in sponsorship in football. And I did a case study about Nottingham Forest Football Club. And I went to a game, started interviewing people outside the ground, very weird. And now I work in sponsorship in football. So I think without really knowing it, I planned my career.
Yeah, that resonates. Something like that happened to me, where I've been like, oh, is this what I was after all the time?
Yeah, I also, I think, but I think that I probably, in the last 3 years, have thought far more about what is really important to me and what I want to do next, and that is since we started working in the women's game. I'm now absolutely sure that I am going to do something in that space going forward. Not sure what.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katie. And finally, Dr. Claire Marie Roberts, welcome. Claire Marie, firstly, thanks to you and your colleagues at the Premier League, because this panel is sponsored by the Premier League. We're very grateful for that. So Claire Marie has an incredible CV. All the panel have incredible CVs, but listen to this one. Claire Marie is a chartered psychologist, a scientist, a BASIS accredited sport and exercise scientist, and at the Premier League her role is head of coach development and insight. Another former athlete, Claire Marie was an international swimmer, and then about 20 years ago switched to football. And played women's football for Swindon Town and Aston Villa, amongst others. We're not done. Her first career was in, anybody guess it? You'll never guess it. Construction and civil engineering. And I talked to Claire Marie about this before the panel, and clearly there's a passion for that. We could run another session just on that. But she retrained as a sports and exercise psychologist, and in 2004, and since then has worked in various roles across the men's and women's professional games. As well as her role at the Premier League, she's a senior research fellow at the University of the West of England. sits on the board of UK Anti-Doping and is an advisor to Nike on women's sport. Fantastic, welcome Claire.
Thank you.
Wow.
So, what a journey. Tell us a little bit more about it and how much of it was planned.
So I'm going to answer your last question first. So I was going to say about 60% of my career was planned, and the other 40% didn't kind of come off because of various different setbacks and things not quite going as I planned them. So when I was swimming, I was a teenager, and I'd hit a bit of a sort of performance plateau, and I'd had a new coach come in, and he'd brought with him a very early version of a psychologist. And I say early version, this is way before anybody in the UK had any sort of concept of psychology in sport. And looking back on it now, it was a little bit ropey, but the support that I received actually helped me qualify for the Atlanta Olympics, and it just really sort of helped me take control of my psychological state in relation to my sport. And at that point in time, I think I was probably 16, and at that point in time I was absolutely fascinated by the power of sports psychology and the impact that it had on me as an athlete, that I thought I was destined to become a sports psychologist. That's what I wanted to do. All of my career advice at school starts with what's your passion, or my passion is sport. And therefore, in the 1990s, for example, when I was having these conversations, the only route available to you was a PE teacher. And I'm going to be very open and transparent. The prospect of going to work every day and just spending it with children was not something that inspired me. So, and I had a conversation with my dad. My dad and my grandfather were both footballers, so I think that's probably where my sort of passion for football came from. And my dad sort of said to me, he said, you need to take control of this. I know the message you're getting is PE teacher, because that was like the most uninspiring thing for me. He said, you need to follow your passion. So I got a place at Loughborough to study sport and exercise science, which was the only route into sports psychology at the time. And at the time, you got a place at Loughborough for your sporting representation. And I actually suffered a career-ending injury, which meant I couldn't actually go to Atlanta to swim. And at the same time, Loughborough said, well, if you're not representing Great Britain swimming, we'll give your place to somebody else. So I didn't go to Loughborough to study sport and exercise science. I did go to Loughborough to study building and civil engineering, which was a very impulsive decision. I thought, I am going to go to this university, and I am going to use the amazing swimming pool that's there and all the sports facilities. And I think in my mind, I thought that I could possibly get back to where I was before I had my injury, and that unfortunately didn't happen. So I found myself at Loughborough studying building and civil engineering, which was fascinating. Hadn't really given it much thought up until that point. And I went into a career in that industry, and I found it inspiring. I found it incredibly challenging, but that's the sort of environment that I love, and I learned a lot about myself during the process. And it was if I hadn't perhaps had my moment of epiphany, which sounds a bit spiritual, and I'm definitely not a spiritual person, I probably wouldn't have made it back into sport. I'd probably still be working in construction and engineering now. But I was actually at the Oval watching England play South Africa cricket, and I just had this moment of feeling like I had unfinished business and I needed to go back into sport. So I decided to go to an open day. I found a specific undergrad degree on sports psychology, which didn't exist kind of when I'd initially decided to go into that career. Went to an open day and they said, oh yeah, no, just, here's an unconditional place, come in September. And I remember saying to my husband at the time, I'm going back to university, and he said to me, if you do that, I will divorce you. It's the worst decision you've ever made. So I was like, brilliant. So I signed up. And never really looked back. So 60%, my life is so much better on it on a number of levels. 60% planned, 40% sort of opportunities I've taken that have kind of moved me in sort of various different directions.
I like that. I think the most planned. I think giving you a a truly elite athlete, that doesn't necessarily surprise me, because I think that's something about the elite athlete mentality. But although it was 60% planned, one of the absolute trigger points for you, from what you've just said, Claire Marie, was, in your words, a moment of inspiration. So you did allow space in there for the unplanned. Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to open it up and ask everybody some questions. I just want to ask my good friend and our head of comms, Pete, there. Pete, I've come without a watch, so could you give me a nudge when we're 10 minutes from the end, and then we can open it up to the floor to ask questions? That'd be all right. Thanks, Pete. There will be the opportunity for everybody to ask questions. So, let's start right at the beginning and think about career planning. Lungi, who do you think should make a career plan?
I think we all should, Jane, and I think it's hard. It's really, really hard, because I think back when I was picking my GCSEs, I thought that was the hardest decision I've ever had to make in my life. I then had to pick my A-levels. That was another really hard decision that I've ever had to make in my life. But actually it became easier as the years went on. I think in terms of planning our careers, we should all be doing that, because that purpose and looking back at, why am I actually doing this? Why am I wanting to go into X, Y, Z? And I think people growing up now have more of that, rather than I need to make a living, I need to earn a wage, and I need to be able to obviously earn money to pay my bills and whatever else. I think organisations have a responsibility in terms of what they're actually doing for their employees, and actually why employees should be picking them. So I think that forms part of it, in terms of your purpose, your aspirations. Giving back, I think, is really important for people, and actually opening industries like the football industry up, because I think it is still quite closed off in terms of what people can do. So if somebody's out there thinking, actually, I want to work in football, you can be really purposeful about that. And there's ways to go about it. And it's talking to people, it's attending sessions like this, it's being involved with organisations like Women in Football, where there is a plethora of resources as to how you can actually get to where you want to go. I think there is a little bit of that happening, maybe too much, in terms of the football industry specifically. And actually, I'm grateful to say that I've only seen this in men or young men who go to a specialist university. And I know I'm at the home of UCFB, so I don't want to call them out too much, but I think false expectations in terms of courses like that, which are so focused and actually don't allow you to grow in other aspects. And I think if you go and do a university course, university is so much more than the course you're actually reading at the time. I think there's other skills you pick up which are just as important, if not more important than those hard skills. And I think that there needs to just be an acknowledgement of that, and actually shoehorning yourself into being whatever it might be that you're aspiring to do, whether it's journalism, whether it's, sports science, which has obviously been mentioned on this panel, whether it's working in, I don't know, sponsorship at a football club or whatever it might be, where that's so niche, and then you get to a point where you're so focused on that, and actually nothing else sort of will work for you. It becomes really, really challenging. So I think it's about finding that balance in terms of being really focused as to what you want to do, but not closing yourself off to opportunities.
And Margie, you, as we reflected, you spoke so strongly about your values, haven't you? When we think about career planning, what's the importance of, how important is it to understand ourselves, do you think?
I think self-awareness is fundamental when it comes to career planning. And even if you planned every single step, or if you are open to a career that is not linear, really being conscious of who you are and where your values are, where your passion lies, will set you in the right path. Because for me, and it was said in the previous panel, it's what gives you energy. It's that North Star, it's that legacy you want to leave behind. So as long as you are connected to that, you're gonna have fun in doing what you do, you're gonna be able to thrive. And I think that's fundamental when it comes to career planning. So I would really advise anyone here to really work on that self-awareness journey. And it's never too late to start if you haven't done it, but I think it's something that is not happening just one time in your life. It's really a constant exercise, because I also mentioned before, your purpose evolves. And it's really always looking, you know, your passions, I think, are something that comes from your, let's say, your proudest moments, your happiest moments, also some of your challenges moments. Your passion is something that is there. But that is, the purpose part is very connected to who you are and very connected to those values. So for me, that's fundamental when it comes to career planning, but also to be open to something different in your career. I think that's also quite fundamental, because in today's world, things are happening, there is uncertainty. If we are open to that, but we are connected to who we are going to be able to be more successful at that. In my career, I've done a lot of investing when it comes to development programs, when it comes to, you know, at FIFA, my team had about $20 million that we could invest into programs for girls and women. But in the business I am now, it's the opposite. I'm building a business, I have to bring products to market. And I think it's something that I was not prepared for earlier in my career, but because I'm connected to my values, I want whatever product or solutions I bring to the market has to be connected to that. It allows me to confidently shift that way. So that, I think, is important when it comes to self-awareness and career.
Just to add to that, sorry, I was going to say that, you know, I completely hear you, because if you don't have a career plan, then you don't know what you need to do to get to it.
Yeah.
And I think that people rely so much on, like, I've got my career, let's say in the football industry, therefore I know everything there is to know about it, and therefore I'm going to just get the next job that I go for. Whereas actually, getting another job requires, that might be slightly in a slightly different area, requires upskilling, it requires research, it requires developing yourself to be able to do that, whether that's, you know, working in men's football and having to shift your knowledge to look into women's football, like we've had to do. Like, you know, we had Premier League sponsorship, then we now sponsor the WSL, a completely different area that we've all had to upskill ourselves in. If you don't have a career plan of where you want to get to, you don't know what you need to do to get there. And I think people are too reliant sometimes on, okay, well, I'm just going to get that job, because rather than going, well, why should I get that job? Because actually that's not my expertise, or somebody else is going to be better qualified or have more expertise in that area.
So what I'm hearing from that, Kate, is thinking in advance about where you want to get to and the route that's going to get you there.
Absolutely, you have to.
Need to do to get there.
And the ever-evolving, like Mayi said, Margie said, ever-evolving world that is the world we work in, whether that is in football or, you know, whether it's upskilling in the metaverse stuff, women's football, as I said, over men's football, all of those things. It requires constant development of your knowledge base and yourself.
Yeah. Claire Marie, we've heard quite a lot about the work we all need to do when we think about career planning, understanding ourselves, understanding our values, building our knowledge, thinking about the route to the next role. What about other people? Who can help us plan our careers, do you think?
So I think, I think there's many different options, and I think it's about trying to build a really good solid network around you. I think that, you know, people often think that there are, you know, particular individuals that can help. Actually, it's probably a little bit broader in terms of the support that you can get. And I think sometimes it's quite difficult to ask for help and sort of support and advice. But I think for me, certainly in terms of the support that I've had, I've made sure that the advice that I've been looking for is as broad and diverse as it can be, because what you don't want to do, and I think a lot of times we might approach the path of least resistance, where we go and we try to tap into support and advice from people that are very similar to us. And I think that's quite easy, and it's just like a little echo chamber. Then you kind of hear what you think you want to. But actually, for me, some of the most transformative support and advice I've got has been actually the most uncomfortable. And the most challenging, and sometimes it's not really what you want to hear. And I think actually, you know, going out and making sure you're asking a whole sort of diverse group of different people for the same advice is actually quite impactful. Certainly, it has been in my experience.
This is that encapsulates everything we're about and everything we're trying to bring about, because diverse groups, teams work better and deliver better results.
Yeah.
Just saw a great example of that on a micro personal scale. And I love your point also about you've got to open yourself up to hear the hard stuff, and you were nodding away at that, Margie.
Yes.
You agree with that, yeah?
I agree 100%. I think one of the best moments in my career, especially finishing a master's degree and coming into a world of work that I was not familiar with, because I live in an environment in Cuba that is completely different from an international environment. And I remember my second role after the FIFA Master, which was a World Archery. I am the Secretary General of World Archery. I submitted a report and he said, "This is not enough. I expect more from you." And I remember that moment, I felt like crying, I felt angry. I look at the work that was done before, I was like, but my work is still is great, you know? But it was a really, really important moment for me to learn on taking feedback that might feel negative into something positive. I was facing someone who was telling me, you can do more, you can be better. And I don't know if it's that athlete mentality, but I took that feedback. First it was a shock, but afterwards for me, something that has driven always in my career. I know I can do more, and I think it's really being opened to when we feel that we get feedback, when we feel that someone is perhaps being hard on us, it's actually telling us, you got potential. There is still much more for you to develop. I want to see more of that. And I think it's important for men and women, but especially I think we women, a comment like this might make us shrink and might make us walk away from a challenging job, or might make us stand up and say, hey, I can do this, right? And I think it's more that positive attitude, not taking it personally. And even sometimes when we're going to take jobs, or we see jobs around that we're like, oh, I can't do that. And perhaps someone tells you that. Think about that potential too. So I think challenging feedback coming from outside or from us, it's the moment for us to reflect and say, what is the potential there? Am I really scratching the surface, or am I going for what I can really do? So it's really been open. And I think also working with people that are different from us, and working and asking feedback from people that might challenge our belief. I think this is also quite important, because as women, sometimes we might feel a little bit threatened if we build a team that is different from us, or if we build people that know better than us. I think also it's something that men also fall into, making this mistake. I think in today's world, we need to build teams around us that are much better than us, that are much knowledge than us. And then we get a stronger team. Think about it like football, right? In football, everyone has a role, and everyone is awesome at doing that role. It's the same as when you build teams. It's the same as when you get feedback. So I would really encourage everyone in your career to think like that, because that really puts you out of your comfort zone, and that's where development happens. Yeah.
And Katie and Lungi, you both kind of hinted you're thinking about the future, and which is all terrific. And please don't show me confidence that you don't want to say. But what kind of looking forward? What kind of time scale would you work on? Would you look 5 years forward, 20 years forward, 5 months forward? You're only as good as your next game? I mean, what is it?
It's a really tough question. I think it's a really tough question. I think it really depends on circumstances. I think it's harder to look really far forward in this day and age, because you don't know what you don't know as well. So you don't know some of the jobs that are available now for women now, you would never have dreamt that a woman could do 20 years ago. So I think that as the world is evolving, more opportunities are going to be realised. So I think that I think for me, it's about planning the things I know I want to make a difference in, or I want to go into, rather than, I want to be this job by this time, because I think that restricts you and limits you. But I think if you can have half an idea of what you want to do, it goes back to my point earlier. I know what I need to do to get there. I know I need to be better at my knowledge of women's football. I need to be more involved. I need to play and network in circles where it's relevant. So you have to have, I think, half an idea, but not necessarily pinpointing a job at a time, because I think then you're setting yourself up for, no room for manoeuvre. But equally, your expectations are sort of misplaced, I think.
Jane, it's interesting you mentioned that, because actually we're just in the middle of doing our 5-year strategy at the club, and I've looked at the 5 years, and I have gone to myself, am I still going to be here to obviously be able to implement this? And actually that doesn't matter, because the strategy is still needed, and obviously everything we're doing now is obviously going to go towards that. But in terms of personally, where I see myself, as I mentioned earlier, I'm obviously still enjoying what I do. The industry is growing, and actually Katie's obviously already mentioned the women's side of things, which is constantly evolving and has actually become so pivotal within the industry in itself. So in terms of what I want to do next, I don't know, but I also think, and resonating with what everybody's said, starting again isn't a bad thing. Pivoting into another industry where maybe I am doing work that I feel is potentially more purposeful than what I'm doing now is something that I'm possibly looking at. And I think there's obviously a lot of young people here, but there's also people who are very, very experienced in their careers, people who have done a lot, have made a massive, massive difference. And actually you're surrounded by an ever-changing world. And actually there are sometimes instances where you're thinking, actually, what am I doing next? Am I still enjoying what I'm doing? And I think it's never too late to start anything new. And but I don't know, I genuinely don't know. And I think I will be at Birmingham City for a long time, just because I know the potential it has, but I'm also really invested in making a difference.
Thanks, Lungi. I was going to come to you, Chloe, because to talk about when it goes wrong, your career-ending injury, but I've had the little tap on the shoulder from Pete, and I do want to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions. Maybe that question will come up. But if you have a question for the panel, please put your hand up. Do we have a roving mic? Do people need a mic? Anybody know? No, that's okay. Oh, yes, we do.
I'm just going to run it around while I go.
Brilliant, Sue, thank you. So, any questions, please?
There's one there.
Oh, we have one here. Just wait for the mic to come to you. Just pick it up for the video.
Sorry, wasn't paying attention to who I'm meant to be asking.
Oh,
Yeah.
just stand up, just against me with your phone. Thank you.
My question's for Claire, actually. So, when I moved into self-employment, it was because I felt like in analytics it was quite hard to be taken seriously as a leader, especially in sports analytics. It's very male-dominated and quite gatekeeping by males, because it's sort of an area that a lot of people are learning about, so I think a lot of people feel insecure in those roles as well. So I'm interested in how you've managed to sort of progress through the world of insight and analytics, and if you felt it's harder to be taken seriously as a leader in those positions, and when you're looking forward into the future, do you feel like you have to fight a little bit harder to get taken seriously? Or obviously you're very qualified, but I still think people can overlook that because of gender.
Thanks, Anna. So a couple of things, and I'll just give you the absolute truth. I genuinely don't care what people think. So somebody asked me this the other day for International Women's Day, and they were like, what happens when somebody's got, a judgment about you or a bias that is inaccurate? And I'm like, it's not for me to address that. That's their perception, and it's not something I feel obliged to solve for them. The approach I've always taken is I will be the most prepared, I'll be the most qualified person, and if you don't want to give me that opportunity, that is your loss. So I genuinely, and I know not everybody takes that view, and I know my view is not necessarily representative of everybody in the room, but that's how I go through it. So I was talking to Jane the other day, and I say, I'm not one of those people, I'm not one of those typical women that would look at something and think that's out of my capability. I will put my application in, and in my career I want to be challenged and I want to be stretched, so I will go for those roles, I will go for those opportunities. And as I say, if somebody doesn't want to give me that opportunity, I see that as an issue with them. If I'm qualified for that role, or I've got enough experience, and would I want to work with somebody that doesn't give me the job just because I'm a woman? No.
Yeah.
So it's a bit blasé, but genuinely that's how I feel. Does that help?
Absolutely.
Thanks. Any more questions? And we've got a couple of hands up. I'll come to the back and then to yourself. So, lady at the back.
Hello, I'm Sandy from Amnesty International UK. I've got a question for whoever wants to answer it. But I guess the saying is the sky is the limit, right? But in terms of career planning, is there like a percentage that is kind of like you need to be realistic, or is there like a percentage of potentially what's deemed unrealistic for you? Is it literally just the sky is the limit? Yeah, whoever wants to answer that.
I can debate. I can start debating a little bit. I think the sky is the limit. It's perhaps, I would say, a potential vision, right? But you have to have some planning. I said 20% because my career took a turn that it was almost impossible for me to see when I was younger. But there are certain things that are important for you to plan and for you to have an outlook around it. For example, I started to study English when I was around 16, and everyone in my environment said, why would you study English? You live in a country that is only Spanish speaker, and you're likely never to leave your country. But for me, it was important for my career, that vision I had to be somewhere else and to be part of this environment. I knew I needed that. So those are, I think, important things that take you to the sky is the limit. So thinking more broadly about what you would need in the future for that vision you have of your career. So I knew I needed to speak English, and I knew I needed to learn other languages, and I'm really proud today I can speak other languages like German, French, or Italian. These are things that have helped me. Then also, in today's world, you need to plan to learn skills that were not in the past, like digital skills. You know, understanding the digital space, understanding the evolution that is happening in the world of work. So upskilling or reskilling yourself is important. So that percentage of planning takes you to that perhaps unlimited potential. So I would say between 20 to 30%, make sure that you are very good at planning that. The rest is about opportunities, like some of my colleagues have said. Sometimes things are uncertain, sometimes an opportunity comes and like, I'm not qualified for this, right? But you gotta take it and you learn. You will be surprised if you audit all the things you've done, how much you match to some job descriptions. But make sure you plan certain things that are in your control. Languages, new skills, you know, things that are around that are needed. I think those things are important to plan. But where you will be, I mean, in 5, 10 years, I always think that I want to go further in my career. So I look 5 years, this is where I want to be in 10 years, where I would love to be in a leading position where I can have bigger impact in sports.
And I like that idea, Margie, about getting yourself ready just in case, you know, learning the languages, learning the digital skills. See what happens.
Yeah.
Thank you. You had a question on this table here, this lady?
Hi, I'm Christy from the Premier League. Lungi, my question's for you. Do you have any examples, in addition to the diploma course that you were put through, where your employer supported you in your career planning to mop up, as you described, the sort of anything else areas that you cover to help you, I guess, thrive and develop?
I think I've had to be quite proactive in terms of what I want to do. And actually, when I proposed that, whether it was at Charlton or at Birmingham City, I have always had the actually go for that. You can have, you know, your days away from the office. Today's a day away from the office. Obviously doing my other role, which is WIF. So I've definitely had that support, but I've had to be proactive in terms of what I want to do. But I also think back to my time at Charlton, and actually my line manager at the time, Michelle, who's HR director at West Ham, who I'm on a panel with a little bit later, she was really, really supportive, because actually she was building a department, she needed the help, I had the interest, and actually I had the curiosity to obviously go and delve into every single part of that football club in terms of what it needed from us as a central support function. But actually, improving the organisation, improving what it meant for employees. And then in terms of Birmingham City, I came into Birmingham looking after the women's team who were competing in the WSL, and 3 years ago the WSL looked different to what it looks like now, and actually that involved getting myself involved with the FA quite a bit in terms of some of the things that they were doing, but I had to do that myself. But actually nobody said, oh, you don't need to do the extra stuff, you know, you've got a day job, just stick to doing that, or stick to doing things the same. So the evolution of the women's game, the evolution of football, I've sort of put myself in the middle of that and actually been really proactive with that, but I've always had that support. And I think something to just bear in mind around that support and career development and professional development when you're in a role, you do have to take a hold of that yourself. Some clubs don't have big, massive budgets for actually supporting you with that, so you do have to be a little bit creative. But then obviously you talk about the Premier League. The Premier League, I know, are quite proactive in terms of what they're doing for their staff members, and then obviously now they're on a new journey in terms of gender diversity as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Mayi. I'm so sorry, folks, we're going to have to wrap up. There were some other hands up, so if we haven't had the chance to come round to you for your question, or you didn't put your hand up, you do have questions, please do seek me out in the lunch break or any of our panel, and we'd be happy to try and help with any unanswered questions that you may have. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to this incredible panel. I hope you've all learned from it and enjoyed the rest of your day. Thank you, panel. Thank you.